FutureDad 54, Voting is Futile. Quote, voting is as much an emotional act as it is an intellectual one. Monica Crowley. I shall commence with a simple hypothesis, and then I shall provide the rationale and evidence to support it. The hypothesis is, voting is futile unless the maximum government size is curtailed in advance, violation punished by lethal force, and observance enforced by an extra-governmental entity. Let's deal with the recent obvious counterexamples first. Trump version 2.0, debatably, and Javier Milei. As mentioned in FutureDad 11, Why Government is So Dangerous, these are unique situations and individuals. Trump is a multi-billionaire property tycoon turned politician. For a few months he teamed up with Elon Musk, an eccentric centi-billionaire. The ongoing Doge effort to cut government continues, but the national debt still rose to $37 trillion by mid-2025. The second, more concrete counterexample is Javier Milei, an eccentric libertarian who came to power in Argentina in December 2023 after a century-long succession of fiscal failures by the state. He brandished a chainsaw on the campaign trail, pointed it determinedly at government bloat, and then proceeded to actually cut the number of state departments in half. Chainsaw. How is Argentina's chainsaw economics faring now? In April 2025, it became one of only 5 countries in the world with a balanced budget, spending no less than it earns. This is particularly impressive because he inherited a socialist fiscal disaster, a country which couldn't balance its budget in 17 years. Annual inflation had fallen from 324% to 38%, and in 2025, his GDP was growing the 22nd fastest in the world. So far so good. But Trump and Milei are only 2 heads of state of major countries in modern history, the latter the first libertarian full stop, who have both broadcast their cost-cutting intent pre-election, then gone on to do it en masse post-election. One in progress, one in practice. This is clearly very rare amongst nations. What about further back in time, say pre-World War II? Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge was the US president from 1923 to 1929. He is the closest historical parallel in history to those two. He presided over the Roaring Twenties and during that period reduced income tax 3 times. He ran a balanced budget by reducing spending by 9% and cut government debt by 30%, the biggest ever in percent terms outside of a post-war period. But even Coolidge stated that the possession of property carries the obligation to use it in a larger service. I cannot emphasize that enough, the obligation. So whilst he moved towards laissez-faire government, he apparently didn't fully believe in it. How long before he would have spun it round to make people meet that obligation? We will never know. He wouldn't run again for a 3rd term when there was no 2-term limit. Baldwin. In Britain, the claimed equivalent of Coolidge was Stanley Baldwin in the 1920s and 30s. He presided over a growth in the welfare state by guaranteeing a minimum standard of living for the unemployed. In other words, he was an advocate of the big government nanny state. He was as much a part of the Longhouse then as the liar Rachel Reeves is now a century later. He is undeniably not the equivalent of Milei. It is incredible that a man described as the British Calvin Coolidge was in fact a redistributionist. It is a sign of how far we've fallen since the last genuine period of liberty, the golden era of the 1890s. What does the British government spending look like now? The UK debt to GDP ratio, analogous to the proportion of your credit card debt divided by household salary, is going in the wrong direction. See the chart. It is tracking at 96% of GDP in 2025. Demographically and immigrationally, this will only continue going in the wrong direction for the next decade. Why? High time preference. Politicians will not carry the can for tough but necessary vote-losing decisions. So instead, they will continue the charade of inviting millions of third-world military-aged men to temporarily save our GDP and maintain the illusion that they are not lying thieves. Altruism. Indeed, the state cannot be trusted to not steal your property. I outlined the reasons before, see FutureDad 11, why government is so dangerous, the most prescient one being that pathological altruism and quasi-virtue signalling will always crowd out any attempts to balance the books. Even the seemingly most stable and long-lasting empires fall to this. The Roman Empire fell principally by the overextension of state redistribution of the private wealth of citizens in an attempt to perpetuate its power. This criminality, the theft of your wealth and that of your children, goes unchallenged. The Longhausian electorate will still keep voting for this until the real-life consequences are impossible to ignore. There simply aren't enough fiscally responsible people in the electorate to vote against it. Egalitarians. From polling, a small minority, likely 20% or less, of the entire electorate do authentically care about government size. By authentically, I mean to the detriment of their own short-term interest. Others say they care, but will still vote for any programme which benefits them, and then whistle as they walk past the graveyard. The rest are, by default, in favour of taxpayer-funded free stuff, because they are egalitarians, i.e. communists. Unfortunately, this is a human condition. The human race is permanently susceptible to political predation. It is the key to my premise that voting is futile. The recent red-pilling of normie voters is championed online, but at best it has dragged the Overton window a little bit towards scepticism of authority, and only that, to no longer trust the science and believe less in mysterious threats to our democracy. But, as a multi-decade project overall, it has failed. You simply need to glance at the pioneering, high-trust, energetic society of the 1950s compared to the angry, demoralised, technologised, zombified society of the 2020s to see that. Time preference. Even when there are wins for liberty and justice, it peels off only the current skin of communism, not the intent and activity underneath. See FutureDad 51 reports of the death of ESG are exaggerated. Similarly, observe the way the British Reform Party has mutated into a left-wing Islamic pressure group. It proposes high time preference as an explicit policy. According to Reform Party Chairman Richard Tice, it doesn't matter that the native British people will be a minority by 2063 because, quote, I'll be long gone by then. Time is not on our side. It takes several voting cycles of sustained anti-communist pressure to force a rational tone in just one facet of government, if at all. In the heady days of the first Trump presidency, the momentum was on his side. The shackles of malfeasance and Democrat anarcho-communism was being thrown off. But Republicans failed to enshrine tax cuts into law. We also saw it with the small but well-publicised move to the right in public discourse on illegal immigration in 2024-2025. Unfortunately, it is also a dead cat bounce. The political and socially dominant direction of travel in the West is still to the left. Cowardly. If you doubt this, think of one single leftist policy which has been reversed. Gay marriage, abortion, human rights, family courts, progressive taxation, mass third world immigration. There are none. It is in fact the opposite. Every single one of these policies is more embedded now in the West than before the supposed rise of the right. It has always been this way. The libertarian right doesn't know how to win the culture. Milton Friedman tried to help Reagan do this in the 1980s and ultimately failed. The 1986 US Tax Act was replaced in 2017. Political expediency means that the supposed right is too cowardly to take decisive action for the long-term benefit of the American taxpayer. Politicians are ultra high time preference by design, and this will not change unless it is forced. Envious. The general public is no better. Even when the fruits of fiscal prudence are self-evident, the loudest sounds are not cheers but protests. In Argentina, criminal suits are raised against Milei and marches form. In the US, it was the anti-Dodge firebombing of Tesla dealerships. These are fueled by envious woke collectivists and anyone not immediately participating in the green shoots of fiscal success. It is enabled by the mammying deep state because it needs to protect you, meaning itself, and its bosoms swell to do so. So now, even if the protests dissipate and the spending cuts take hold, all it takes to undo everything good that has been done in Argentina and the US is complacency. For people generous with others' money to win the next election with the promise of free stuff, and the whole cycle begins again. Broken. A cycle that will never be broken until universal suffrage is ended. In what plausible democratic scenario could that happen now? You cannot push the toothpaste back into the tube. Women make up the majority of voters and they live longer, so voting alone cannot overturn universal suffrage. A broken political system cannot be repaired with the same tools which broke it. The solution must be permanent. A small, prudent, ethical government is both a rare and temporary exception. It depends on conditions too unusual to be relied upon. We cannot wait for an occasional Milei or Trump to press pause on government largesse, and then when they are gone for someone else to press play. The solution must be preemptive. The political elite would rather admit to wetting the bed than confess to the nation that the system is utterly broke. That's why a rational, coherent framework for government, a written constitution with the emphasis on fiscal prudence, has to be established even before a politician takes his coat off in the morning, with the assumption that the government, universally and inherently, is a criminal gang. Written. Thus it is clear. The restriction on fiscal largesse must be written into a country's constitution. The Longhausian state relies on predation of its citizens, so its fiscal limits must be indelibly written into it like a stick of Blackpool rock, namely that expenses must never exceed income. The restriction must be enforced with ruthless vigour by a non-state actor, or it too will be captured by the next malfeasant government. A strict fiscal limit neatly sidesteps the downstream issues of welfare state and third world immigration without having to spell it out in law. Law which won't work because it wouldn't have the teeth to stop the utopianist urge to spread the wealth around and begin the road to communism. And with no free and boundless welfare state, there is no incentive for the third world to invade. This is especially true in the UK, where the NHS is a socialist religion and is utterly hijacked by mass immigration, both in terms of employees and promiscuous users. Preemptive. So all in all, that is why permanent preemptive legislation is the only answer. After the quasi-civil war has run its course, see FutureDad 33, How and Why the UK Will Collapse, then the new constitution must come into being. What should it look like? Simply this. Through legal, lethal force, the government cannot run a deficit, not ever, not even via emergency. If emergency is allowed, the government will redefine emergency as a situation which requires your money to bribe other voters who are not you. Notwithstanding a miracle event that means my key injunctions are put in place immediately, it leaves us with just two post-collapse scenarios for Britain. 1. Quasi-civil war, 2028 to 2029. Then, part of the rebuilding must include instantiation of a written constitution which has an unassailable and unamendable decree that no UK government may run a single calendar quarter's fiscal deficit, spending more than it makes through taxes and other income, under pain of immediate disbandment and public execution of its leaders, its observance enforced by an extra-governmental body of 12 wise and honest men elected by direct vote, with no exceptions, emergency or otherwise. 2. Quasi-civil war, 2028 to 2029. Then, There is no written fiscal stricture and penalty as per scenario 1. The cycle continues of centralisation, egalitarianism, universal suffrage, malfeasance, socialism, mass immigration, anarcho-tyranny, decay. Rinse and repeat. Conclusion. If we don't take this action, things will get much, much worse. As I explained in FutureDad 40, the West can only focus on secondary issues. The political elite will continue to point to, dramatise and make valiant efforts to solve secondary issues only. A flight crew which celebrates helping you to untangle your seatbelt whilst the plane engines are on fire and you plummet to the ground. In the 2020s, after a century of fiscal and societal recklessness, the bill has finally arrived. All roads lead to collapse and quasi-civil war, but not all roads lead out the same way. Which way, British man? Which way, Western man? FutureDad.